Every single minute of every single day, the equivalent of 36 football fields of forest is erased from the face of the earth. If you close your eyes and listen to the modern world, the soundtrack of human progress is the deafening roar of chainsaws and the heavy, mechanical grinding of bulldozers, tearing ancient root systems out of the soil. We are currently clear-cutting our way through the planet's lungs to satisfy a global timber industry worth over $600 billion. The underlying logic that drives this massive, planetary-scale extraction is simple, brutal, and universally accepted as an absolute law of nature. If you want to harvest wood, you have to kill the tree. But what if I told you that this fundamental law, the very foundation of our global forestry industry, is a complete lie? What you are looking at is not a scene out of a dark fantasy novel, and it is not a computer-generated anomaly. Hidden away in the misty, quiet mountains of Kyoto, Japan, exists a living, breathing paradox that shatters everything we thought we knew about harvesting natural resources. These towering, alien-looking structures are Kitayama cedar trees, but they have been manipulated using an ancient, highly guarded technique known as Daisugi. This technique allows human beings to harvest perfectly straight, premium-quality timber continuously, generation after generation, for up to 700 years, without ever cutting down the base tree. Imagine being able to walk into a forest and simply pluck massive, heavy wooden logs straight from the branches, exactly the same way you would pick an apple off a tree, leaving the organism completely intact, healthy, and ready to grow more. This technique produces a virtually infinite supply of high-grade wood. It prevents soil erosion, it captures carbon continuously without the devastating release that comes from killing a root network. And most remarkably, a single Daisugi mother tree can outlive dozens of human generations, quietly offering up its resources century after century. This brings us to a terrifying cognitive gap, a question that should haunt anyone who looks at the state of our dying planet. If humanity has possessed the holy grail of sustainable forestry for 7 centuries, an elegant, perfect solution to deforestation, why on earth is the modern world still choosing to destroy itself? Why aren't these trees being planted across the vast expanses of North America, Europe, or the Amazon basin? To understand this mystery, we cannot just look at the tree. We have to look deep into the architecture of the human mind, our primal drives, and the psychological traps that dictate how we interact with the physical world. This is not just a story about botany. This is a story about the ultimate blind spot in human evolution. To unravel the origins of this impossible tree, we have to travel back in time to the 14th century, to the Muromachi period in Japan. At this point in history, Kyoto was a crucible of profound cultural and architectural transformation. The elite samurai class and the nobility were becoming obsessed with a new, highly refined philosophical aesthetic known as wabi-sabi, which found beauty in simplicity, natural asymmetry, and profound minimalism. This philosophy gave birth to the Sukiya-zukuri architectural style, the iconic, elegant wooden tea houses that have become synonymous with traditional Japanese design. But this architectural obsession created a massive logistical nightmare. To build these exquisite tea houses, the architects demanded a very specific type of material, Kitayama cedar. They needed logs that were perfectly straight, completely free of knots or blemishes, and incredibly strong, to serve as the main display pillars, known as tokobashira, in the center of the tea rooms. The wood had to be visually flawless to satisfy the intense aesthetic scrutiny of the elite. Here is where the geographical reality of Japan crashed headfirst into human desire. Japan is an island nation where roughly 70% of the landmass is dominated by steep, rugged, inhospitable mountains. There simply were not enough flat valleys to plant the sprawling, massive forests required to meet the skyrocketing demand for this luxury timber. The physical environment imposed a hard, unyielding limit on what humans could achieve. In any other context, the human response to this kind of environmental friction is brute force. When we run out of resources, we usually expand outward, conquering new lands, or we extract what is left until the ecosystem collapses entirely. But the foresters of Kitayama did something completely counterintuitive. They realized that if they could not expand their forests horizontally across the limited land, they would have to expand them vertically, on top of the trees themselves. They looked at the ancient art of bonsai, the practice of meticulously restricting and shaping a miniature tree over decades, and decided to apply those exact same principles of biological manipulation on a massive, industrial scale. The process they invented is a masterpiece of biological engineering. When a mother cedar is planted, it is allowed to grow normally for several years. Then, the foresters commit an act of calculated trauma. They cut off the main trunk, a technique that essentially tricks the tree's hormonal system. In plants, a phenomenon called apical dominance usually ensures that one main vertical stem grows stronger than the others. By severing the main apex, the foresters force the tree to redirect its survival energy. The mother tree panics, and in a desperate bid to survive, it sends out dozens of vertical shoots from its base. This is where the true mastery begins. The foresters do not just let these shoots grow wild. Every 2 years, skilled workers must climb these towering, bizarre-looking mother trees, completely barehanded. Using nothing but specialized hand blades, they meticulously prune the lower branches of every single vertical shoot. This ensures that the new trunks growing upward have absolutely no branches, which means the resulting wood will have 0 knots. Because dozens of shoots are growing mere inches apart on the same mother base, they are forced to compete violently for the limited sunlight filtering through the canopy. This intense, vertical race forces them to grow arrow straight. After about 20 years, a shoot reaches maturity. The loggers harvest it, leaving the mother tree completely alive and deeply rooted. Almost immediately, the mother tree begins pushing vital nutrients back up, starting the 20-year cycle all over again. A single, well-maintained mother tree can support up to 100 of these vertical trunks at the same time, looking like a massive, surreal wooden candelabra holding up the sky. When you hear about a tree being forced to grow timber this quickly, your brain immediately forms a logical hypothesis. You might think, if the wood is growing in such an overcrowded, accelerated manner, the quality must be heavily compromised. It must be weak, brittle, or purely decorative. But modern material science has put Daisugi timber under the microscope, and the results completely shatter that assumption. This is where the story shifts from a historical curiosity to an engineering marvel. When you test the structural integrity of a Daisugi log against a standard cedar grown in a normal forest, the numbers do not seem to make sense. Daisugi wood is 140% denser than standard cedar. Furthermore, it is 200% more flexible and resilient under stress. How is this biologically possible? It comes back to the intense, localized environment the foresters created. Because the shoots are growing so close together on the mother tree, their growth rings are forced to be incredibly tight and compact. There is no room for rapid, porous expansion. This slow, agonizingly tight growth creates a cellular density that makes the wood phenomenally strong. And because they were meticulously pruned to have no branches, there are no knots. In structural engineering, a knot in a piece of timber is a focal point of weakness, a place where the wood is most likely to snap under extreme pressure. By eliminating the knots entirely, the Kitayama loggers inadvertently created a hyper-material. This density and flexibility made Daisugi timber the absolute perfect building material for a country plagued by constant, violent seismic activity. When an earthquake strikes a traditional Japanese structure built with Daisugi pillars, the wood does not shatter, it bends, it flexes. It absorbs the kinetic energy of the earth and disperses it, keeping the structure standing. So, let us look at the facts we have gathered so far. We have a forestry technique that stops deforestation in its tracks. It prevents the catastrophic soil erosion and landslides that occur when mountainsides are stripped bare of roots. It produces a continuous, generational supply of material, and the resulting wood is physically superior, denser, and stronger than almost anything else available. By every logical metric, this should be the global standard. This should be taught in every agricultural university on the planet. Governments should be subsidizing massive Daisugi plantations to replace the destructive clear-cutting of the Amazon, the Congo, and the boreal forests of the north. But they do not, and they never will. To understand why this miracle technique is confined to a tiny, misty corner of Japan, we have to examine the dark side of human psychology and the economic frameworks we have built our modern world upon. The failure of Daisugi to spread globally is not a failure of botany, it is a failure of human incentive. The modern global economy is driven by a psychological imperative for instant gratification and the fastest possible return on investment. Human beings are deeply wired to prioritize short-term rewards over long-term stability, a cognitive bias known in behavioral science as hyperbolic discounting. We systematically undervalue a massive reward if it is placed too far in the future, and we overvalue a smaller reward if we can have it right now. The modern timber industry is the ultimate manifestation of this psychological flaw. The business model is brutally efficient in the short term. A corporation buys a massive tract of land. They deploy heavy machinery to completely level the forest in a matter of weeks. The wood is processed, shipped, and sold, generating millions of dollars in immediate quarterly profits for shareholders. The land is left devastated. The topsoil washes away. The complex root networks rot and release massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, and the local ecosystem collapses. But none of that matters to the balance sheet, because those environmental consequences are externalized. They are problems for the future, problems for someone else. This creates a systemic trap. If one timber company decides to act ethically, planting trees and waiting decades to harvest sustainably, their competitors will simply continue clear-cutting, undercutting them on price, and driving the ethical company out of business. It is a classic race to the bottom, where the most destructive, short-sighted behavior is economically rewarded, and any attempt at long-term ecological balance is aggressively punished by the market. Now, introduce Daisugi into this modern capitalist framework. You cannot simply throw a handful of Daisugi seeds into the dirt, walk away, and expect premium timber 5 years later. Daisugi is not an industrial process. It is a profound, lifelong relationship between human labor and biological time. For a mother tree to even begin its first cycle of producing harvestable shoots, it requires incredibly precise, manual shaping for the first 10 to 15 years of its life. During this time, it yields absolutely zero product and zero profit. The labor involved is grueling. This cannot be automated by a machine or a drone. It requires highly skilled human beings willing to climb vertically, balancing on thin branches, working with hand tools in the freezing rain and sweltering humidity, dedicating their lives to a singular craft. And here is the most terrifying hurdle for the modern mind to accept: the timeline. Even after the mother tree is established, it takes 20 years for a single shoot to reach maturity. When a 14th century logger in Kitayama began cultivating a new Daisugi mother tree, he knew with absolute certainty that he would never see the final result of his labor. He was bleeding, sweating, and freezing on the side of a mountain, carefully pruning branches so that his unborn grandchildren, 40 years in the future, would have a sustainable livelihood. This requires a multi-generational perspective, a way of conceptualizing time that is completely alien to the modern world. Today, a CEO is evaluated on quarterly earnings reports that come out every 90 days. A politician plans their policies around an election cycle that happens every 4 years. An investor demands a return on capital within a fiscal year. We have constructed a society that physically cannot comprehend, let alone finance, a project that requires half a century of silent, unprofitable patience before it yields its first reward. We complain endlessly about the destruction of our environment. We watch documentaries about the burning Amazon and feel a deep, agonizing sense of existential dread. We are desperate for a solution, but the bitter truth is that we only want a solution if it fits perfectly into our current lifestyle. We want a technological magic bullet, a genetically modified super tree, or a giant carbon-sucking machine, something that allows us to keep consuming at our current frantic pace without having to change our behavior. Daisugi offers no such comfort. It offers a perfect solution, but the price it demands is a complete rewiring of how we interact with time, labor, and nature. It demands that we stop viewing the earth as a vending machine that dispenses raw materials on command and start viewing it as a living system that requires immense, unselfish maintenance. The tragedy of the Daisugi tree is that it exposes the illusion of our own progress. We look back at the 14th century and often view our ancestors as primitive, lacking our advanced science, our heavy machinery, and our global logistics networks. Yet, those primitive loggers solved a problem of infinite sustainability that our modern, hyper-advanced civilization is currently failing to solve on a planetary scale. They achieved an equilibrium with their environment, not through superior technology, but through superior discipline. Today, the demand for Daisugi timber in Japan has drastically fallen. Traditional Sukiya-zukuri architecture is incredibly expensive, and modern Japanese construction relies on cheaper, imported wood or prefabricated synthetic materials. The forests of Kitayama are now largely quiet, maintained by a shrinking handful of aging artisans who still know the ancient techniques. The towering mother trees stand in the mist, looking like ancient, forgotten gods, holding up their perfect, straight wooden pillars to a world that no longer cares to look. But their existence remains one of the most powerful rebukes to the modern way of life. They stand as undeniable physical proof that humanity does not have to be a parasite on this planet. We are entirely capable of incredible foresight. We have the capacity to design systems that are elegant, sustainable, and beneficial for both humans and nature. The fact that Daisugi works, that it produces superior material indefinitely without killing the source, proves that the destruction of our environment is not an inevitable byproduct of human existence. It is simply a choice. We choose to clear cut. We choose to prioritize the next 90 days over the next 90 years. We choose the comfort of cheap, disposable materials over the grueling, beautiful discipline of long-term stewardship. The next time you see footage of a rainforest being bulldozed, or hear debates about the impending collapse of our natural resources, remember the silent forests of Kyoto. The solution to our greatest existential crisis has already been invented. It was perfected 700 years ago by men who understood that true mastery over nature does not mean destroying it. It means working alongside it so perfectly that your grandchildren will never know the fear of running out. The problem is not that we do not know how to save the forests. The problem is that saving them requires a level of patience that humanity seems to have forgotten. If you found this deep dive into the hidden truths of our relationship with nature compelling, and you want to continue exploring the massive blind spots in human psychology and history, make sure to engage with our upcoming content. Our next investigation will take you into the heart of another impossible paradox: how the most dangerous, unstable environments on Earth actually forced humanity to develop our most brilliant leaps in survival architecture. You will not want to miss how pressure shapes evolution.